Okay, I think we're all here. So welcome everyone. This is Michael Reed. He's going to share with us a talk. We had programmed a talk about a transit that is going on this year, but Michael proposed that we would maybe give an intro about Vedic astrology and how it how we can use our spiritual path and this amazing science to go together and to help us through this path. So I agreed with him that we would maybe go this way more than talk about the yearly transit. So yeah, welcome, Michael, and go ahead.
Well, thank you. You know, I wanted to do this precisely because of what you were saying, because I often get into debate with other people in the astrological community, because my really strong feeling is that Vedic astrology really is a form of yoga, because it gives you the capacity to really know yourself and to know what your hindrances are, what you're here to work through. And when you're armed with that knowledge, I often like explaining to people, you know, from my perspective, that yoga very much is about self-acceptance, even more so than it's about self-improvement. Because if you're going to like improve anything about yourself, you have to really get to know yourself and accept your shortcomings, as well as accept your gifts. And so I often like to say that really Vedic astrology is one of the highest forms of yoga when it's used in the appropriate manner. I find quite often when people contact an astrologer, usually the thing they're contacting the astrologer about is, when is this going to happen? What is going to happen? How is it going to happen? And whilst, you know, those things can be very important, the thing that often gets omitted from people's questioning is, why is this happening? Because all those concerns that people have about what's happening in their life and, you know, when am I going to get into a relationship? Generally, that indicates that the person's like unhappy about their relationships. Or when am I going to buy a home? It generally lets us know that they're unhappy about their home situation. And there's generally something that's underlying that. And I'm a strong believer, you know, when people come in, because I often, you know, I obviously do prediction for people with Vedic astrology, but I'm also very big on giving everybody who comes my way the why of the situation, because I think that that's exceptionally important. But one of the things that I find that is less answered in terms of astrology, and if you go and you ask an astrologer or somebody who's been playing around with astrology, even quite often a lot of professional astrologers, if you ask, how does astrology work? You'll find that that's the answer that pretty much everybody comes up short on. And so I've, you know, kind of been really curious about that myself, and I've come up with some really good ideas to explain this, because I think it's important for people to understand the, let's say, the logistics or perhaps the metaphysics of how astrology really works. So here's a question I have for everybody. How many people here are familiar with the Five Koshas or the subtle sheaths? Yeah. We can go over them a little bit briefly because I have them on my diagram, but I just thought I'd check ahead and see how many people were already aware of those particular concepts. So really, one of the ways that Vedic astrology or astrology in general really works is through those five sheaths, because really what astrology is it's a model for consciousness. And if you'll see behind me, I have these two books here, which are called Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, which is like the fundamental text of Vedic astrology that everybody refers back and forth to. And quite often people miss that there's a really wonderful definition of just how astrology works right in Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us into the PowerPoint that I prepared and see if I can find the appropriate slide here to start with. Here we go. So in this first slide, you'll see at the very top a quote from Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, which is the supreme unborn spirit. Now that in itself is exceptionally profound, because what it's talking about is the aspect of the divine that's not bound by the concrete realm of existence, but exists both outside, and as we're going to find out here in a moment, and inside the concrete realm of existence. So the supreme unborn spirit has had many descents. Janardana. So Janardana is a name of God that agitates human, causing fear and worry, which sounds like a really pleasant thing to like have some like, aspect of God that's like wanting to agitate us and cause fear and worry. Really what's going on with that is it's coming in to stir us up so that we confront something in our life and begin to work out our karmic patterning. An interesting concept, which is often explained in several different philosophies as it relates to the whole concept of the divine or the infinite. If you try to understand why we're here, right, your mind can go in like endless loops about that. So you can go, okay, well, God's in all beings, but we're here so we can find God within ourselves. But if God's within all beings, why would God want us to work out the whole concept of finding God within ourselves if we're already one with that? And you can go round and round and round and round with that question until you don't find an end, unless you think of the concept that perhaps the concept of God splintered off from itself to give itself an experience of itself. So you can experience yourself in bliss. And that's a really wonderful gift. So this whole concept of God agitating humans and causing fear and worry, really that's just a play of consciousness. We're the ones who have the fear and worry. God's just going, hey, wake up and, and remember me and recognize this aspect of me, that's inside of you. So the supreme unborn spirit has had many descents. Janardana, in the form of the planets, or the grahas as they're called in Vedic astrology, rewards the fruits of the karma of the living beings. So the word graha itself, which is what's used for planets in Vedic astrology, means to seize, to grab onto you and make you behave in a certain way. And so that's the whole concept of what the planets do. But really what's being said here is that God is the planets. I'm just scrolling down so like everybody can see the text below. God is the planets. God comes down in the form of the planets. So destroying the strength of the daityas, or the demonic race, or the part of ourselves that's less conscious of God. Increasing the strength of the devas, which are the angelic forces, or the part of us that's closer to God. Aiming to establish dharma. The auspicious births proceed regularly from the planets. So the auspicious births are the 9 incarnations of Vishnu. So Vishnu is the aspect of God that permeates all of creation. So really the foundation that's being laid down here is that, God permeates all of creation. Humans, this little remote control that I have, this pen, God's permeating all of those things. I often joke with my clients and go, right now, Vishnu is having a talk with Vishnu over Vishnu, right? But, the mind can't grasp onto those concepts. It's very difficult for the mind to grab onto that. So what's being laid down here is the foundation that the planets really relate to aspects of the divine. They relate to aspects of Vishnu, who's the aspect of God that permeates all of creation. So the avatar Rama comes from is the sun. The moon is the Yadu Lord Krishna. Narasimha, which is a lion form of Vishnu, comes from Mars. Buddha comes from Mercury. Vamana comes from Jupiter. Bhargava, also known as Parashurama, is connected to Venus. Korma is connected to Saturn. From Rahu comes Sukara, also known as Varaha, and from Ketu, the avatar Meena. And all others, now all others, this means all the other deities, and it also means on a certain level, all humans. All others are also planetary born. So there's a concept within Vedic philosophy called the Atma or the Atman, which means the soul. It's the soul of all things. And there are generally two main types of Atman that are spoken of, which is the Para Atman, or the supreme soul, which resides within the individual, or the Jivatman, which is the individual soul, which resides within the individual. So those with Para Atma as the larger portion are all known as heavenly. Those with Jiva as the larger portion are known as the living beings. So the Para Atman form of God has gone forth from the planets, the sun, etc., and given birth to Rama, Krishna, and all the avatars. Then those avatars are absorbed at the end after concluding their business of purifying the consciousness of the living being. The Jiva portion goes forth and is born as humans, etc., and all other animals and plants, etc. Similarly, these also then melt at their end into the imperceptible. So what's being said here is all things are God, right? And the planets exist to purify the consciousness of the living being. All the planets, the sun, etc., Brahma, Shiva, etc., these and others are more abundant in Pada Atman, or Supreme Soul. Okay, so we're going to skip over the next bit. It's also talking about, this is a little more fine-tuned, so I'm not going to go too deeply into that, about how other incarnations of Vishnu, actually this is important, we'll go over this bit. So Rama, Krishna, O wise one, likewise Narasimha and Sukara, these are full avatars. These are full avatars of Vishnu. Everyone else is possessed of a jiva portion, or is a living being. Okay, so here we have the concept of the planets, which in reality are living conscious incarnations of Vishnu, right? The planets, though, so where are the planets? Who wants to say something to that? Where are the planets? It's a really simple question. They're up there, right? Yeah, they're up there in the heavens, right? So we haven't spoken about us, we've spoken a little bit about us mortals down here on Earth, but we haven't gone into immense detail with that. So now we're going to go into talking about that concept. So now we're understanding the planets. Planets are aspects of God. Okay, so the signs in Vedic astrology, they're pretty much the same as in Western astrology in terms of the names, but they're called the Rashis. So the word Rashi, when it's related to a sign, gives the idea that the Rashis are a group, because Rashi means a heap or a quantity or a number or a pile or a mass of something. So what a Rashi is a number of degrees. It's a way of dividing things. When we get further into the concept of Vedic astrology, there are these things that are called Vargas, which are also divisional charts. So a Rashi is also a pile of Vargas, but we'll leave that to the side for now. Just suffice it to know that these different divisions give rise to the divisional charts, which we also work with in Vedic astrology, and they have their own Rashis. But we're going to go more into depth about the concept of Rashis as signs. So going further into Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, again, we're talking about Vishnu. The imperceptible Vishnu, the part of Vishnu that you can't see initially, also known as Janardana, is also the Kala Rupa, or the figure of time. He's time personified, whose limbs, whose body parts become unconscious, right? So that's saying here's all these different body parts. So the signs are the body parts of God, so to speak, but there's no consciousness in them without the planets. right? So, people, when I put this idea forward, people go, so what if I have a sign that doesn't have any planets in it? It doesn't mean that that area of your life is dead. Because the thing is even when signs rather don't have planets in them, signs are ruled by planets. So they always have that consciousness within them. But without that consciousness of Vishnu, they're just body parts. So what the signs really are, the signs give rise to something in astrology that's called the houses. In Vedic astrology, we call that the bhavas. So the houses are the different areas of our life, like your relationship or your career or your home. Those are all created as a function of the signs, right? So when we're talking about the signs and we're talking about the houses, what we're talking about in actuality is the living incarnated being. Now, quite often, people who become a little bit skeptical about astrology, they go, but astrology doesn't include the earth. Yes, it does. That's the signs. And those are the houses. That's you being incarnated here on the planet. That's the experience of the earth, right? So very important concept is the signs really are unconscious without something breathing consciousness into them. Okay, they're the unconscious limbs of Vishnu, representing the cosmic man as time personified, with each Rashi representing a body part. And that actually does happen. Aries represents the head. Taurus represents the face. And so those are actual body parts that are connected to that. So it begins to be seen that the Rashis are the realms in which the Grahas and Nakshatras, which we haven't spoken about yet, produce, wherein consciousness is breathed and the various areas of our lives are impacted. The Rashis form the foundation of the bhavas or the houses, which we shall later discuss. This is from a course that I taught. And here's the name of the signs: the ram, the bull, the pear, meaning Gemini, the crab, the lion, the girl, which is Virgo, the balance scale, which is Libra, also called Tula, the scorpion, the bow, the crocodile. That's actually Capricorn, believe it or not. So in Vedic astrology, Capricorn is represented by a crocodile. The pitcher, which is Aquarius, and the fish all follow upon each other. So here we have the planets. Here we have the living being. Who is going to give the consciousness of those planets to the living beings? That's the function in Vedic astrology of something called the Nakshatras. Okay, I want to see, just bear with me for a moment. I'm going to go into one of my folders because I think I have a really wonderful picture to kind of share with you some of the astronomy, just briefly, that's behind the astrology. Let's find 2018. There we go. Let's bring this up. Okay. So what the signs are, this is the path of the sun, as the sun goes north to south from solstice to solstice. What the signs are the 12 equal portions of this line. That's what creates the signs, right? Regardless of which zodiac a person uses. So that moves north and south. That's the path of the sun. But as the earth is rotating on its axis, the stars don't move north to south. The stars move east to west, right? So that's a different division of the heavens. In Vedic astrology, that's also cut into equal portions, and those are the 27, sometimes called lunar mansions, but also in Vedic astrology, they're called the Nakshatras. They're a different division of the sky, and here's what the Nakshatras do for us. So as I was saying before, they're like the bridge between the planets and our earthbound consciousness. In order to understand the Nakshatras, we need to understand a Vedic deity who's called Varuna. And if you read the Vedas, like the Rig Veda, you'll find Varuna is mentioned over and over again. And he seems to take on different forms throughout the Vedas, right? So he was first connected in the Vedas with the skies, and then he's connected to the waters. Let's talk about the skies first. There's a portion of the Rig Veda that says that Varuna put the stars up in the sky and then split heaven and earth asunder. So Varuna created the concept of duality, and he put the stars in the sky. Really, what's being said there is that Varuna put the Nakshatras in the sky, because the Nakshatras are related to the fixed stars. So Varuna put the Nakshatras in the sky and created the concept of duality. He's also sometimes connected to waters, the waters like the ocean, right? And sometimes he's also referred to as being connected to the concept of universal justice, the cosmic justice, and then truth. Now, these all seem to be different things: sky, water, justice, truth, but really they're all connected. And we're going to explain that here in a moment. So Varuna was one of the Adityas. So the Adityas were the sons of Aditi. Aditi is the name of the mother goddess who's boundless. It's the concept of the goddess that's boundless in creation. And she gave birth to the Adityas. There's all sorts of lessons in Vedic philosophy, because the Adityas are 12 different versions of the sun that are turned into deities, right? So there's a connection there between those 12 different versions of the sun and those 12 signs. That there's a connection that's actually there. We're not going to go too deeply into that right now, though. So the Adityas, really, because the sun in Vedic philosophy and Vedic astrology, and Vedic philosophy connected to Vedic astrology, is the Atman, or the soul of everything. Okay, the sun represents the soul. So what the Adityas are is they're 12 different versions of the soul turned into deities. Okay, so the Rig Veda lists 7 Adityas, but Bhagavata Purana lists 12, which are then referenced to the sun. So there is importance to this connection, and even the sequence in which Varuna is connected to the skies, the water, justice, and truth. As I was saying before, Varuna was noted for placing the Nakshatras in the heavens. So Varuna is also connected to the water. So we're going to go into that. So Krishna states that amongst water creatures, he is Vishnu. I'm sorry, he is Varuna, right? So Krishna states that amongst water creatures, he is Varuna. So Krishna is the incarnation of Vishnu, as we were talking about a moment ago, that's connected to the moon. Okay? So it's no surprise to understand that Varuna is somewhat connected to the moon as well. And as we were talking about before, Varuna is connected to water. He's the Lord of the waters and water creatures, and also relates to the oceanic consciousness of God, which is vast and deep. The ocean waves are a result of the moon's gravitational pull on the earth. Who here knows the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali? So you know one of those earliest sutras, which is about, roughly translated, it means yoga is about stopping the modulations of the mind, right? That's what this is all related to. The moon relates to those mind waves, those things that, kind of create that movement. So Varuna also relates to that. And so how does that tie in with justice and truth? Well, those modulations of the mind happen so that we behave in a certain way, and our life gets rectified so that we come to understand the concept of truth. All of that happens through Varuna, who's responsible for putting the stars in the sky. Okay. So Varuna placed the nakshatras in the sky, and each night, Varuna, as the moon, visits a different one. As he does, he creates waves of consciousness within the individual. So the moon is also connected to the earth and not just the sun. The moon is reflecting the light of the sun or the Atman or the soul to the earthbound consciousness, right? So it's connected to both the earth and the sun. As we noted before, Varuna is also a sun deity. So Varuna is the moon, which bridges the Atman, or more specifically, the Para Atman, together with the earthbound consciousness of the Jivatman. Okay, I just want to read over this and see why I put this here. Actually, that's not as relevant as what we're getting into here. Okay, so here we have the Atman, soul of everything, Para Atman, sometimes Paramatma, the supreme soul, Jivatma, the individual soul. The moon represents Manas, or our sensory mind, right? And it's our sensory mind that gives rise to our consciousness. But sometimes our consciousness perceives things in a little bit of a distorted manner. Okay, so the moon's purpose is to reflect the light of the sun, that of the Atman. As well, its purpose is to influence the tides or the waves of consciousness to stimulate the growth of our evolutionary path. A strong moon in the horoscope with positive influence can help to do so in a clearer and less distorted manner. A weak moon does so with more distortion to the degree of its more distorting influence. A waxing moon, which is the moon when it's going from new to full, will cause us to grow our life externally in a productive manner in harmony with our evolutionary path. And when the moon wanes, external growth decays, which forces us to be more introspective. So generally, people who have a waning moon in their horoscope, you'll find they're more introspective in nature. And people who have a waxing moon, they generally tend to be a little more outgoing. So here we have this other sutra. The Lord is in all beings, and the entire universe is in him. All beings contain both Jivatma and Paramatma amshas, or divisions. Some have predominance of the former, while yet some have the latter in predominance. Paramatmamsha is predominant in the planets, the sun, etc., and Brahma and Shiva and others. Their powers or consorts, because within this thought pattern, each of the deities, their wife carries the Shakti of that deity into creation, which is why sometimes you'll see names of a deity in the Hindu pantheon, and it'll have like an E after it, which is like of that particular deity, right? So their powers or consorts too have predominance of Paramatmamsha. Others have more of Jivatmamsha. So Nakshatras, what they do is they bring in that power of the planets into our consciousness. Okay, so now you're going, well, why were we talking about koshas a little while ago? Because we seem to be really far away from that. Well, actually not, because when we go in and we look at the koshas, let's go back to this. So the koshas, what they are, kosha loosely translated means envelope, right? Or what they're known as is the 5 subtle sheaths. These are the things that encase your soul, right? When you're coming here into existence. Beyond this, the Atman generally tends to be considered to reside most intensively in the Anandamaya Kosha, which is the bliss sheath. So we'll read over each of these. But what they are is the envelopment of the soul, as the soul is coming into being, and they function on different levels. So the Anandamaya Kosha means composed of Ananda or bliss. It is the subtlest of the 5 koshas. In the Upanishads, the sheath is also known as the causal body. In deep sleep, when the mind and senses stop functioning, it still stands between the finite world that we all exist in and the pure self. Anandamaya, or that which is composed of supreme bliss, is regarded as the innermost sheath of all. The bliss sheath normally has its fullest play during deep sleep, while in the dreaming and wakeful states, it has only a partial manifestation. That's why you have those deeply symbolic dreams that you can't figure out what it's all about, because that's your soul trying to talk to you through the realm of sleep, right? The blissful sheath is a reflection of the Atman, which is truth, beauty, and bliss absolute. It's mostly related to the element of ether. Ether relates to space, okay? Then you have the Vijnanamaya Kosha. Vijnanamaya Kosha means composed of Vijnana, or intellect, which is the faculty which discriminates, determines, and also wills. It makes things happen. So it's often defined as a combination of the intellect and the 5 sense organs. It's the sheath that's composed of more intellect associated with the organs of perception, because we perceive things and then we try to discriminate what it is that we're perceiving. This is done through the Vijnanamaya. The buddhi, which means discretion or the capacity to use our intellect to determine what we're going through, with its modifications and the organs of knowledge, form the cause of the chit, or awareness or consciousness, which is a modification of prakriti, which is nature made up of the 3 gunas. So the Vijnanamaya Kosha is endowed with the function of knowledge, and it identifies itself with the body and the organs, etc. So the Vijnanamaya sheath can't be the supreme self for the following reasons. It's subject to change. It's insentient. It's a limited thing, and it is not constantly present. Okay. Then you have Manomaya Kosha. Manomaya means composed of manas, or the mind, or consciousness. So the mind, along with the 5 sense organs, is said to constitute the Manomaya Kosha, the mind along with the 5 sense organs. So the Manomaya Kosha, or the mind sheath, is said more truly to approximate to personhood than Annamaya Kosha, which we haven't discussed yet, or Pranamaya Kosha. It's the cause of diversity, the cause of I and mine. Adi Shankara, which is an ancient sage, likens it to clouds that are brought in by the wind, and again, they're driven away by the same agency. Similarly, the bondage of humans is caused by the mind, and liberation too is caused by that alone. It's related to the fire element. So then we have Pranamaya Kosha. Pranamaya means composed of prana, the vital principle, the force that vitalizes and holds together the body and the mind. Prana holds together the body and the mind. It pervades the whole organism. Its one physical manifestation is the breath. As long as the vital principle exists in the organisms, life continues. Coupled with the 5 organs of action, it forms the vital sheath. It is a modification of vayu, or air, and it enters into and comes out of the body. But interestingly enough, even though it's a modification of air, it's most closely related to the water element, because we can soothe ourselves through working with the breath, and we can calm our emotions, and that's why it's connected to the water element. So Annamaya Kosha. This is the sheath of the physical self, the grossest of the 5 koshas, named from the fact that it is nourished by food. So you need food to survive. This is relating to the body. So living through this layer, humans identify themselves with the massive skin, flesh, fat, bones, and filth, while the human of discrimination knows itself. The only reality that there is, as distinct from the body, is knowing oneself. The physical body is formed of the essence of food. Birth and death are the attributes of the Annamaya Kosha. This most closely relates to the earth element. Now we're going to go into an explanation of how this all gets tied together. Let's see if we can find that. It's somewhere in here. I think I might have gone past it. Let's see. Okay. There it is. There's the one. So here is the Anandamaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, and Manomaya Kosha. The interaction of the planets and the Nakshatras takes place up here in the Anandamaya Kosha and the Vijnanamaya Kosha. It's perceived through these lower three elements. But you can also say that these lower three sheaths relate to the signs and the houses. But above the realm of the signs and the houses is the interplay of the planets and the nakshatras. So all the things that we're experiencing through astrology, and the things that baffle people as it relates to astrology relate to the concept of a model of consciousness. So we're all experiencing these planetary interactions with, if you're looking at it through the realm of Vedic astrology, also through the nakshatras, that's taking place more in the realm of the higher self. We perceive it as impacting an area of our life through the lower three sheaths. I once found a really wonderful book in a dollar bin, which is generally where you find all the really wonderful books. And it made a really good relevance to the concept of what consciousness actually is. And it was talking about how the way that we're able to see things is by light reflecting off of an object. So light hits an object and it's reflected back to us. And so we see it. In the dark, you can't see anything because there's not enough light to see it. And so consciousness is the same way, which what's happening is the light of our purity is bouncing off those things that are keeping us from experiencing that purity. And that's why we have all these experiences in our life, because the light of our pure consciousness is bouncing off of things. So the job of the planets and the nakshatras and the signs and the houses is to purify our karma. And quite often people miss that and they get caught up in the day-to-day existence of going, I don't have a job. When am I going to get a job? I'm having a hard financial time. When is that going to go better? On a certain level, and who here has ever seen the picture of Vishnu reclining and he's got a lotus flower growing out of his navel? And there's a picture of Brahma, the creator, sitting on that lotus flower, right? But Vishnu is just sleeping and reclining, right? So the whole concept of creation comes out of Vishnu in that manner. So really that's a model for each of us as living beings. We're all here participating in a play or participating in a dream. And it takes us a long time to hopefully not too long, to wake up, from that. So the job of astrology really is to purify our consciousness so that we can wake up in that manner. I want to touch briefly on another subject before, I maybe see if people have some questions that they want to discuss. Generally in astrology, there is the concept of most people like to refer to it as the rising sign, right? It's also sometimes called the ascendant. In Vedic astrology, that's called the lagna, right? So what that is that's the sign that is rising on the eastern horizon at the time that you're born. There's also the concept of the seventh house. That's the sign that's on the western horizon at the time that you're born. Seventh house generally relates to the concept of relationships, other, foreign countries, etc., right? So here's the eastern horizon, here's the western horizon. So remember that experience you likely had when you're a child, or maybe you still go through that experience too, where you looked at the horizon and you kind of went, I'm going to get there, I'm going to go there, right? Only you get to the horizon and there's another horizon. And you go, okay, well, now I want to get there. And then you get to that horizon and there's yet another horizon. That's the whole realm of the human existence, first house to the seventh house. That's what we're all experiencing. That's the plane of the horizon in astrology. Now, there are two planets in Western astrology. They're called the South Node and the North Node. In Vedic astrology, they're called Ketu and Rahu. Okay. So what Ketu and Rahu are, remember that picture we had here? I'll bring it back up again. And we had the path of the sun going north and south. Okay, so remember, the sun is the Atman. It's our soul. The moon, the path of the moon is about 5 degrees off that path of the sun. So the moon is your manas, or your sensory mind. So the path of the moon, manas, or our sensory mind, crosses the path of the sun, the soul, in 2 different places. So when the moon, manas, or our sensory mind, is going north and it crosses the path of the sun, that's Ketu, or the South Node. And when that moon is going back south and it crosses the path of the sun, or the Atman, that's the North Node, which is, I said that wrong. North Node is Rahu, is when the moon's going north, right? I just said it backwards. So Rahu is when the moon is going north and it crosses the path of the sun. And when that moon's going back south and it crosses the path of the sun, or the soul, that's Ketu. Okay. Those are like a separate 1st and 7th house. Only they're the 1st and 7th house of your karma. So understanding Ketu and Rahu is a very important thing within the realm of existence, because what you're doing is you're understanding your karmic path. In Vedic astrology, when we look at a chart, here I'll bring up a chart for you briefly, just so you can see, there are all these different areas that we have charts in. There's a different Ketu and Rahu in each of these, and quite often they're in a different sign. What this relates to is the fact that in different areas of our life, we have different bodies of karma to work through, right? So there's always so much going on for an individual. Ketu and Rahu, in my opinion, are one of the most important things in the horoscope, because understanding them helps you to understand what you're here to work on. I quite often find, though, when I'm working with clients, because I do a lot of work working with something called a karmic analysis, but quite often I'll find that when I'm discussing what a person needs to work with, or why they're having that difficulty, that they'll ask me, what do I do to make it go away? Right? And it's hard to get people to understand that whilst you're here to work on that karma, and the idea is to make it go away, it probably won't go away completely in this lifetime, because that's the body of consciousness that you're here to work on. What happens with it is you work through one layer of it, poof, another layer arises. You work through that layer, another one surfaces, and so on and so on and so on. So the whole purpose of your existence is working through that karmic path. And remember how we said the planets are there to purify your consciousness. All of the planets will interact with one or the other of Ketu and Rahu. So what they do is they act as a filter for the energy of all the other planets to go, right, I'm going to focus all this energy of the planets on this one area and make you work through your karma. So in a nutshell, that's the beauty of astrology. So when all those things are going on and you're going, well, why is my job not going well? Or why is my money not going well? Or why am I not married? Or why am I married? If that's the particular instance that you're working through. It all boils down to the interaction of all the planets in your horoscope and going through a time where you're meant to purify your consciousness. Now, just as we have individual karma, we also have group karma or worldly karma. And this year specifically, we're being asked, I'm not going to go too deeply into that. I can probably summarize all the astrology of the year in one big thing, which is, which path do you want to go down? Right? Which path do you want to go down? Which path do you choose? Right? And that's something that's going to be brought to the surface for us a lot as humanity over the course of this year, and I would also say well into next year. Vedic astrology doesn't really work with the outer planets, but I like to dabble in them because you can find a lot through them upon occasion. Not this year, but next year, we're going through an interaction between Pluto and Neptune. So, I wouldn't be surprised to see humanity having to work with things in regards to rising above their challenges to perception and how they're perceiving things. It may manifest in some lessons around our world oceans. And that's something we're needing to learn a lesson, whether that's through global warming or whatever the cause may be. The oceans will likely bring a lesson to us next year. This year, we're working through an intense alignment between Saturn and Uranus. And it's trying to teach us to let go of old ways and to usher in new ways. Now, that means something to each individual personally, and it means something to us as humanity globally. So if ever there was a year to get really focused on your yogic path, whatever that means for you, whatever your yogic practice may be, this is the year to do that. Get clear on who you are and where you fit into the bigger picture.